Chapter 7 of Afloat on the Ohio, an historical pilgrimage of 1,000 miles in a skiff from Redstone to Cairo. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sue Anderson. Afloat on the Ohio by Reuben Gold Thwaites. Chapter 7. In Dixie, oil and natural gas. At Witten's Bottom, the Long Reach, photographing crackers, visitors in camp. Above Marietta, Saturday, May 12th. Since the middle of yesterday afternoon, we have been in Dixie, that is, when we are on the West Virginia shore. The famous Mason and Dixon line, latitude 39 degrees, 43 minutes, 26 seconds, touches the Ohio at the mouth of Proctor's Run, 121 1/2 miles. There was a heavy fog this morning on land and river, but through shifting rifts made by the morning breeze, we had kaleidoscopic, cloud-framed pictures of the dark, jutting headlands which hem us in, of little white cabins clustered by the country road which on either bank crawls along narrow terraces between overtopping steeps and sprawling beach, or winds through fertile bottoms, according to whether the river approaches or recedes from its enclosing bluffs; of hillside fields, tipped at various angles of ascent, sometimes green with springing grain, but oftenest gray or brown or yellow, freshly planted, charming patches of color in this somber-hued world of sloping woodland. At Williamson's Island, 134 miles, the fog lifted. The air was heavy with the odor of petroleum. All about us were the ugly, towering derricks of oil and natural gas wells. Witten's Bottom on the right, with its abutting hills, the West Virginia woods across the river, and the maple-strewn island between, all covered with scaffolds. The country looks like a rumpled fox and geese board with pegs stuck all over it. A mile and a half below lies Sisterville, West Virginia, the emporium of this greasy neighborhood. Great red oil tanks and smoky refineries its chiefest glory. Crude and raw like the product it handles. We landed at Witten's Bottom, W., the boy, and I, while the doctor, philosophically preferring to take the oily elephant for granted, piloted Pilgrim to the rendezvous a mile below. Oil was "struck" here 2 or 3 years ago, and now within a distance of a few miles there are hundreds of wells. 200 in this year gravel alone, sir, I was told by a red-headed man in a red shirt, who lived with his numerous family in a 12-foot square box at the rear of a pumping engine. An engine serves several wells, the tumbling rods, rudely boxed in, stretching off through the fields and over the hills to wherever needed. The operatives dwell in little shanties scattered conveniently about. In front of each is a vertical half-inch pipe 6 or 8 feet high, bearing a half bushel of natural gas flame, which burns and tosses night and day, winter and summer, making the bottom a warm corner of the earth when the unassisted temperature is in the 80s. It is a bewildering scene, with all these derricks thickly scattered around, engines noisily puffing, walking beams forever rearing and plunging, the country cobwebbed with tumbling rods and pipelines, the shanties of the operatives with their rude lamp-posts, and the face of nature so besmeared with the crude output of the wells that every twig and leaf is thick with grease. Just above Witten's commences the Long Reach of the Ohio, a charming panorama for 16.5 miles in a nearly straight line to the southwest. Little towns line the alternating bottoms, and farmsteads are numerous on the slopes. But they are rocky and narrow, these gentle shoulders of the hills, and a poor class of folk occupy them. Half fishers, half farmers, a cross between my round bottom friend and the houseboat nomads. A picturesquely dilapidated log house with a whitewashed porch in front and a vine arbor at the rear attracted our attention at the foot of the reach near Grape Island. I clambered up to photograph it. The ice was broken by asking for a drink of water. A gaunt girl of 18, the elder of two, with bare feet, her snaky hair streaming unkempt about a smirking face, went with a broken-nosed pitcher to a run, which could be heard splashing over its rocky bed near by. The meanwhile I took a seat in the customary arcade between the living room and kitchen, and talked with her fat, greasy, red-nosed father, who confided to me that he was a pioneer from way back. He occupied his own land, a rare circumstance among these riverside crackers, had 130 acres, worth $20 the acre. Just yon ways back of the house in the cliffside there was a coal vein 2 feet thick, as yet only worked for his own fuel, and lately he had struck a bank of fire-brick clay, which might some day be a good thing for the gals. On leaving, I casually mentioned my desire to photograph the family on the porch, where the light was good. While I walked around the house outside, they passed through the front room, which seemed to be the common dormitory as well as parlor. To my surprise and chagrin, the girls and their dowdy mother had, in those brief moments of transition, contrived to arrange their hair and dress to a degree which took from them all those picturesque qualities with which they had been invested at the time of my arrival. The father was being reproved as he emerged upon the porch for not slicking his har and washing and fixing up afore having his picture taken. But the old fellow was obdurate, and joined me in remonstrance against this transformation to the commonplace on the part of his womenfolk. However, there was no profit in arguing with them, and I took my snapshot with a conviction that the film was being wasted. We were in several small towns today, in pursuance of the policy of distributing our shopping so as to see as much of the shore life as practicable. Chief among them have been New Matamoras, 141 miles, and St. Mary's, 154 miles, in West Virginia, and Newport in Ohio, 155 miles. Rather dingy villages, these each, after their kind, with a stone wharf thick grown with weeds, a flouring mill at the head of the landing, a few cheap-looking, battlemented stores, boys and men lounging about with that air of comfortable idling which impresses one as the main characteristic of rustic hamlets, where nobody seems ever to have anything to do. A ferry running to the opposite shore for cattle and wagons, a heavy flat with railings made to drift with the current, and for foot passengers a lumbering skiff with oars chucking noisily in their roomy locks. Every now and then we run across bunches of oil and gas wells, and great signs, like those advertising boards which greet railway travelers approaching our large cities, are here and there perched upon the banks, notifying steamboat pilots, in letters a foot high, that a pipeline here crosses the river, the vicinity being consequently unsafe for mooring. Our camp tonight is on a bit of grassy ledge at the summit of a rocky bank 10 miles above Marietta on the Ohio side. A rod or so back of us is the country road, which winds along at the foot of a precipitous steep. It is narrow quarters here, and too near the highway for comfort, but nothing better seemed to offer at the time we needed it, and the outlook is pleasant through the fringing oaks and elms across the broad river into West Virginia. We had not yet pitched tent, and all hands were still clambering over the rocks with Pilgrim's cargo, rather glad that there was no more of it, when our first camp bore appeared. a middling-sized man, florid as to complexion, with a mustache and goatee, and in a suit of seedy black, surmounted by a crushed-in derby hat, and, after the fashion of the country, giving evidence on his collarless white shirt of a free use of chewing tobacco. I have seldom met a fellow with better staying qualities. He was a strawberry grower, he said, and having been into Newport, a half-dozen miles upriver, was walking to his home, which was a mile or two off in the hills. Would we object if for a few moments he tarried here by the roadside, and perhaps we could accommodate him with a drink of water? Patiently did he watch the preparation of dinner, and spice each dish with commendations of W.'s skill at making the most of her few utensils. Right glibly he chattered on, now about the decadence of womankind, now about strawberry growing upon these Ohio hills, with the crop just coming on, and berries selling at a shilling today in Marietta, when they ought to be worth 20 cents. Now on politics, and of course he was a populist. Now on the hard times, and did we believe in free silver? He would take no bite with us, but sat and talked, despite plain hints, growing plainer with the progress of time, that his family needed him at nightfall. Dinner was eaten and dishes washed, the others left on a botanical roundup, and I produced my writing materials, with remarks upon the lateness of the hour. At last our guest arose, shook the grass from his clothes, with a shake of hands bade me good night, wishing me to convey his good-bye to the rest of our party, and as politely as possible expressed the great pleasure which the visit had given him. Some farmer boys came down the hillside to fish at the bank, and talked pleasantly of their work and of the ever-changing phases of the river. Other farmers passed our roadside door, in wagons, on buckboards, by horseback, and on foot, in neighborly tone, but with ill-disguised curiosity in their eyes, wishing me good evening. When the long twilight was almost gone, and the moon an hour high over the purple dusk of the West Virginia hills, the botanists returned, aglow with their exercise, and rich with trophies of blue and dwarf larkspur, pink and white stonecrop, trailing arbutus, and great laurel. And then, as we were preparing to retire, a sleek and dapper fellow, though with clothes rather the worse for wear, came trudging along the road toward Marietta. Seeing our camp, he asked for a drink. Being apparently disposed to tarry, the doctor, to get him started, offered to walk a piece with him. Our comrade stayed out so long that at last I went down the road in search of him, and found the pair sitting on a moonlit bank as cozily as if they had been always friends. The stranger had revealed to the doctor that he was a street fakir by profesh, and had struck it rich in Chicago during the World's Fair, but somehow had lost the greater part of his gains, and was now associated with his brother, who had a junk boat. The brother was well-heeled, and stayed, and kept store at the boat, while the fakir, as the walking partner, rustled round 'mong the grangers to stir up trade. The doctor had, in their talk, let slip something about certain Florida experiences, and when I arrived on the scene was being skillfully questioned by his companion as to the probabilities of a feller o' my perfesh catchin' on down thar. The result of this pumping process must have been satisfactory, for when we parted with him, the fakir declared he was going to try on thar next winter if I bust my bottom dollar. End of chapter 7.